Hi, good afternoon. My name is Kenya Lambert, and I serve as the Vice President of Development for the Shriver Center on Poverty Law. Thank you all for attending this very important webinar today. Before we begin, I would like to share a bit of information about the Shriver Center for those of you who are new to the Shriver Center. The Shriver Center has been fighting for economic and racial justice for over 50 years. And the Shriver Center believes in a future free from poverty and racism, where every single person has equal power under the law. Now, in order to do this, and in order to make this a reality, the Shriver Center works towards fighting for people in poverty. And we do this through litigation, shaping policy, training attorneys across the nation, and also convening advocates across the nation. So welcome again to the Shriver Center webinar today, Justice for Black Lives, Reforming the Criminal Legal System. I want to thank you all again, and also I want to thank Verizon for supporting the work of the Shriver Center and also for sponsoring this webinar. Thank you very much. And now I would like to just do one housekeeping rule before I introduce our moderator. Housekeeping rules for today is that there will be a Q&A portion towards the end of our panel. This is an opportunity for you to ask questions, and please enter your questions into the chat and our moderator will ask your questions. And so now, with that being said, I would like to introduce our moderator for this afternoon, Kathy Grillo. Kathy is Verizon's Senior Vice President of Public Policy and Government Affairs. She leads all of Verizon's federal and state public policy initiatives. She is responsible for the company's public policy positions on a wide range of issues. Thank you so much, Kathy, for being with us today and leading this discussion with our panelists. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Kenya. Yeah, it's an honor to be here, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation. I just want to start with just a little context about Verizon and why we're sponsoring this event today. Verizon's been involved in issues surrounding reform of the criminal legal system for about 2.5 years. And we know, as a big company and as a company that's dedicated to racial equity and equality, that it's our responsibility to use our influence and our voice to speak up on issues that are important to our customers and our employees. And certainly the reform of the criminal legal system is very important to both. I've also personally been involved in with organizations that are dedicated to reform of the juvenile sentencing laws. And as part of that, I've helped develop a pro bono project within Verizon where we represent incarcerated citizens who are sentenced to extreme sentencing terms as children and are now applying for parole due to some recent Supreme Court precedent. So I'm really interested in these issues and very excited to have that discussion today, and thank you all for joining us. So with that, I'm going to turn and introduce our panelists. Anntionetta Rountree is the founder of Justice for Rika J, an organization that she was inspired to create after her daughter, Rika J. Rountree, was murdered in 2019. Justice for Rika J is dedicated to the safety and well-being of children and providing peer-to-peer support for parents navigating the foster system. Ann's life purpose is to advocate for mothers and caregivers impacted by the criminal, legal, and foster systems. So thank you, Ann, for being here today. Patrice James is Director of Community Justice at the Shriver Center. Patrice has spent her career tackling the inequities of the criminal legal system. Most recently, she was a founding attorney of Still She Rises, Tulsa, where she provided holistic legal representation primarily to low-income women of color, engaged in community building, and advocated for shifting the narrative of women involved in the criminal justice system from broken women to broken systems. Jennifer Soble. Jennifer is the executive director at the Illinois Prison Project. She's a criminal defense attorney and policy lawyer based in Chicago. Prior to starting the Illinois Prison Project, Jennifer was an assistant federal defender in the Northern District of Indiana, where she represented clients charged with serious federal crimes and specialized in forensic issues, juveniles charged as adults, and sentencing law. Finally, Representative Carol Ammons is serving her third term as the full-time state representative of the 103rd District, which includes Champaign-Urbana. Representative Ammons looks to bring her experience as a grassroots community organizer for equality in education, media, technology access, and civil rights to her work as a public servant in the House of Representatives. So thank you all for being here today. I'm going to start, Patrice, let's start with you. Why is reform of the criminal legal system so important, and how has structural racism impacted it?
Sure. Thank you. I'm really excited to be here with everyone. I think criminal legal system reform is so important and so necessary. Why it should be on the front and center of everyone's mind is because it's ubiquitous and it impacts millions of people every single day. And it has done this for decades. It is a system that not only impacts the person that is directly involved, so the person that has the contact with law enforcement, but it impacts all of us. It impacts our family members. People are not isolated. People come from communities. They come from families. And when people are arrested, they often have children. I think we need to pay attention because of the cost of incarceration, because of the cost of our criminal legal system. We spend billions of dollars every single year to arrest and incarcerate people, to keep people locked in cages with no data to support that we are safer or to support that this is actually the best alternative for people. I think structural racism has impacted the criminal legal system in every single way. And I think it includes the segregation of communities, the divestment of communities, underfunded schools, over-policing, biased policing. It has completely impacted our system, but that carries over into the actual system itself with the disparities in sentencing between people of color and white people, that Black people are spending longer time in prison than white folks. It plays out throughout our system and we can no longer ignore it.
So Jennifer, I know you've been working within the legal structure for a long time. Do you have any insight on the same question?
Sure. I think, and thanks for having me today. I think the wider world is starting to realize what advocates and people who are directly impacted by the justice system have known for a really long time, which is that our system is unjust, it's imprecise, and it is riddled with really faulty assumptions. It assumes that it's going to find truth. It assumes that incarceration and prosecution are just and effective responses to problems that sometimes exist and sometimes are fabrications by a system designed to oppress people. It assumes that a sentence that feels appropriate when it is imposed will remain appropriate for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, 30 years. The system that we currently have here in Illinois not only wrongly prosecutes, wrongly convicts, wrongly sentences people every single day. And by wrong, I mean factually incorrect, but also morally incorrect. But it also has almost no mechanism for review, which means that whatever horror we inflict on an individual and his or her community at the time that we choose to prosecute and sentence, we collectively live with until that person serves every single day of that sentence as imposed or until they die. And we are, as individuals and as a community, really burdened by a system that assumes its righteousness from the outset and has no opportunity for review.
So, Anne, I'm going to turn to you. I know a lot of these issues are very personal to you. So what impact does the current system have on those, beyond those individuals that have been arrested or incarcerated. Tell us a little bit about your perspective.
I mean, it doesn't work. It doesn't help. I got a DUI, and I got a second DUI, and I was sentenced to 30 months and told that I was a menace to society. And so I got sentenced to 30 months in prison for that. I literally got sentenced because I didn't complete programs, is what it boiled down to. They gave me a certain amount of time to do programs. I refused to do programs because of what was going on with my daughter. And so I was sentenced to prison time. And no sooner than I went to prison, within 2 weeks, my daughter was dead. So what I got while I was in prison, the death of my daughter and having to suffer through that through my entire term, there was no help with that. There was no compassion. There was no reform. There was nothing. I didn't get anything out of being in prison except for mentally confused by what life was going to look like when I got out. And when I got out, I got nothing. You know, so I mean, I don't know what prison does except for hold a body in space, teach you new crimes, introduce you to other criminals to make bigger crimes. I mean, there's no help with putting us in prison. And then we got our kids who's now wrapped up in the system, who's dealing with something completely different. And I mean, the psychological damage that comes from the separation of that child happened to be pulled to the jail, then told, well, your mom's not doing this, or you're not behaving, so we're not going to take you to the jail to see your mom. I mean, it's just so much psychological stuff that goes along with it. I don't think that, I mean, there's no help in locking people up for driving under the influence for 30 months because they don't complete a program. I mean, there's got to be, I don't know. I don't see any hope in it, and I've been there.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being here and sharing your story. I know when we were doing some of our pre-calls, you wanted to share some of your views on the foster system. Is that something you want to talk about right now?
Absolutely. We can go all the way back to 2016 when I made the decision to give my daughter to her father after I got in trouble. And at that time, I didn't even know that they had, got DCFS involved. But at that time, I guess I was in jail, so I didn't get any paperwork. And so I guess at that time I was found unfit because I was locked up. And of course, I wasn't able to take care of my daughter, go to court, get any paperwork related to this in the first place. So upon getting out, I go to get my daughter back and I can't get her move forward. My daughter's being abused by somebody who's indicated twice for abuse already. But because of my criminal and what I'm dealing with criminally, they're not even paying attention to this. So from 2017 to 2019, I'm fighting, investigations being done, but they're not listening because I'm going through my own criminal stuff. So we've got these social workers that don't even care to do their job and look out for our kids. They're not making these people take our kids to the doctor. They're not doing anything. At the end of the day, my daughter was tortured. She was abused horribly, and now she's gone. She was murdered. DCFS was very much involved. They didn't do anything. They decided to harass me, who was fighting to keep my other sons, because I did have custody of my other kids while I was fighting for my daughter. They harassed me, who was doing this, working, holding the place down. You guys are harassing me to hold on to my son because I'm fighting this DUI and drug offense, and you're not doing anything to go over here and look out for my daughter because I'm fighting for my daughter, but I don't know how it all works or how it all don't work. But I know that something needs to change because there's no help in it. And they're really training our kids up from young kids. My son can tell you so many, when I went to prison, he was so innocent. He was so innocent. When I came out, he's like getting him back, he's like a little man. He's like a grown 13-year-old man. I mean, trying to raise him as a mother and a son in that 16 months that he was gone away from me, he turned into a 13-year-old man. And this is what the system feels is better. And they wouldn't place him with my family. And that's a whole nother story in how they would rather pay these people outside to take care of our children than just let my family have them or let me have them, who's trying. So, I mean, there's so much that goes into it just needs some checks and balances. There needs somebody to be looking into it. People need to know that DCFS, the child welfare system, is not the system that they think that they are. They're not protecting our children. They're throwing our children into situations, and it's not helpful. I would like to challenge them to take a child from a loving home, and show me what's better that you're putting them in. Show me the place that you're putting them in, because most of these people aren't having psychological tests done. They're not taking our kids to the doctors. They're not feeding them. I mean, they're using them for God knows what. But for the mass, they don't know that. But my children been through it. So I know what's going on inside those houses. Having knives pulled on them. The racial tension being put into places, small communities, predominantly white communities, and where you're the only Black child and having to deal with all that at such a young age. It's horrific. But that's what my son went through, rather than trying to place him with people like us or trying to put him with my family, you know? So, I mean, there's so much that needs to be done in that respect.
If I can just jump in and build on what Ann was saying, and I think what Ann is saying is so important, and why at the Shriver Center, we work both with the criminal legal system and the foster system. We really believe and see these systems as parallel systems. We know that children that are in the foster system are more likely to enter the juvenile legal system. You're in the juvenile legal system, you're more likely to enter the criminal legal system. The foster system really is a policing system in the same ways that the criminal legal system is a policing system. It is a system that, just like the criminal legal system, disproportionately impacts Black and brown children. So these are two systems that we really need to look at. We need to look at them together. And I think if we're talking about Black lives, we're talking about why Black lives matter, you cannot ignore the foster system. There's also a disproportionate impact of the system on women, in particular Black women, that are losing their children. You know, if you walk into any metropolitan criminal courthouse, you will walk in and you will see nothing but Black faces. Oftentimes, if you walk in particular in Chicago, if you walk into a child protection courtroom, you will see nothing but Black faces. And we are losing our children to our systems. We are losing our people to these systems and to cages without better outcomes. We spend billions of dollars a year, every year, and put money into these systems. What happens if we put money into community-based resources? What happens to the Miss Rountrees of the world if we gave just a fraction of support to her, or the resources that we give to systems? What if we give them to the Miss Rountrees of the world? What happens to our country then?
I do want to add too an important fact when it comes to playing hand in hand with DCFS or the child welfare system and the criminal system. They want to prove our boys, or they want to prove us to be so angry and so feisty. And this is some of the reports that I got of how my son's behavior was so bad. Of course it was. You put this Black boy with this family that don't want him there anyways. That's got him here for these different reasons. And of course he's showing you that side. How many times did my son have to go to the hospital, have these things done because he's acting out, and all he's doing is defending himself. And he's telling these social workers this stuff. But this is proof that my son has behavioral problems. This is proof that he's an angry child. And this is proof that he needs these services that they're spending these billions of dollars on. Funny that my son's been back since May and we haven't had any of these problems. You know, so I mean, it's just it needs to be fixed, or thrown out.
Representative Ammons, I know this has been a really important issue to you throughout your career, and so I'm going to turn it over to you for your thoughts.
First of all, thank you so much, Ms. Kathleen, for Verizon hosting this really important conversation. And certainly I respect the work of the Shriver Center. We've been working together over the several years that I've been in the General Assembly on issues just like this. I mean, DCFS and DLC are parallel institutions, and they were designed specifically parallel to one another. I wanted to just make a brief quote that I'm going to read to you all under Jim Crow laws. And it says, the name Jim Crow was adopted to represent a system of American laws that were craftily applied after the Civil War for the express purpose of controlling the emancipated ex-slaves. That's what Jim Crow laws were constituted for. And that's what has evolved out of every single system. So all of these are just Jim Crow systems, DCFS, DOC. The school systems have evolved in the same way. If you look at the parallel outcomes of the school system, you will see similar kinds of outcomes when it comes to children in K through 12. If you look at higher education and the lack of access for Black students, you'll see a similar kind of pattern in higher education. So the reason why I made that point is this is the moment that America has to, A, come to terms truthfully with its relationship with the Black community, and B, it has to come to terms with the unraveling of systems that were built on Jim Crow philosophy. So schools, in some cases, religious institutions play a part in this. We see this happening in Department of Corrections. We see this happening in DCFS. We see this happening overall, traffic court. We see it happening on the streets for traffic stops. So we have to come to terms with the relationship of Black people in America to its institutions, and we have to unravel them. Drug laws need to be repealed, right? So we have all of these things, these systems that were built to control the ex-slave. When you make a people superfluous and you don't need them anymore, you don't need them for economic purposes. So then we get policymakers that start drafting laws that criminalize everyday behavior that other communities may also do. But because policing is targeted to Black communities and brown communities, you see them turn up at the courthouse more than any other community. And some make the assumption that in some way Black people are inherently more criminal than any other people, and that's why this is happening. That is the falsest notion that came out of Jim Crow South and North. And so for us today, our charge is so huge, because we come along in a generation where Black people are sick and tired. I can hear Miss Anntionetta, my condolences to you for your baby. And I know you're fighting hard to save your son, because there is structural racism that targets, unfortunately, your son and my grandson that I'm now concerned about. So we have so much work to unravel this. That is an important part. I'll just conclude by saying, since I've been in the General Assembly, right now, the Illinois Legislative Black Caucus has been pushing for significant reforms in Illinois around criminal justice and how it should be implemented. I have 21-page document of bills that we have either passed or we have been trying to pass for the last several sessions that I hope our colleagues are now on the same page with us to say that this system is founded on disparities, is founded on inequity, is founded on racism. And we have to unravel that if we want to see a better Illinois and ultimately a better America, because people are not going to continue to sit on the sidelines and allow you to murder their children in traffic stops. They just can't do that. I can't do it, and I can't ask anyone in my community to do that. We can't sit on the sidelines and allow you to tell us that it's appropriate for police to be able to hide behind their collective union contract when they are committing either murder or misconduct, police brutality on our young people. We can't sit on the sidelines and allow that to happen any longer. So people like me become targets of policing organization, which I'm perfectly fine at that. But people like you can help us raise the issues and pass legislation that will hold them ultimately accountable. If the police institutions won't be accountable to the citizens, all of us, then I'm with Minnesota. We don't need policing institutions. Those are the questions that are before us today, that we have to position ourselves to answer. So thank you so much, Ms. Grillo, for Verizon hosting this very important conversation. And I do hope that we can see significant change in Springfield in the next session and into the new session, going into the new session. Clearly, Patrice James won't stop. Shriver won't be stopping their work, and Carol Ammons won't stop either. So thank you for having me on the call.
Well, thank you for your leadership.
Thank you.
So Jennifer, I know, we've got a question here in the chat. So Representative, I'm going to come back to you. There's some questions about some of the more important of those reform bills that you have, that you've been working about. So Jennifer, I thought I would just turn to you as well. And let's maybe in this discussion, and I'll open it up frankly to everybody, to be more specific about what are the specific issues that you think are most urgent, the most urgent need to address right now on the policy side.
When you're a hammer, everything's a nail, and I'm a lawyer who thinks about prisons. So for me, everything is prison reform. We spend here in Illinois $2 billion, billion every year locking up people who don't need to be locked up. 20% of our prison population is elderly. Many, many, many more are sick. A third of the people who are in prison right now are serving on level 2, 3, or 4 felonies, which means the lowest class of felony there is. All of those people are eligible under current law to be released by the Department of Corrections, which the Department of Corrections, because you haven't heard about it in the news, they are not releasing people despite the fact that we have a pandemic. And so I guess what I would really urge folks to think about, and Representative Ammons to think about, is when we're thinking about criminal legal reform, we tend to, for lots of political reasons and sort of structural reasons, we tend to think about prospective criminal reform. How do we fix this problem going forward? But the harms that our system has perpetuated against Black and brown communities in this state and across the nation have been going on for literally centuries. And so there are right now like 38,000 people in our Department of Corrections who have been harmed. Not every single solitary person down to the very last one has the same sort of, has been harmed in the same way, but thousands and thousands of people in our prison system right now are in prison because of the structural racism that Patrice talked about, the over-policing that Representative Ammons talked about, the over-sentencing that Ms. Rountree talked about. 30 months for a DUI is ridiculous, especially when you have 2 small children at home. I mean, we know from study after study after study that incarceration doesn't work, that people who serve incarcerative sentences, especially for crimes like DUIs, have worse outcomes, are less likely to succeed, are less likely to find themselves successful 5 years down the line, are economically disadvantaged. And the fact that Ms. Rountree went into prison and her daughter died 2 weeks later, and that there was no way for her to get out to deal with the trauma that her family experienced, to deal with her own personal grief, to deal with life, the fact that our system doesn't have a mechanism for her to come home under that situation is exactly the problem. So I would start with prisons, but that's because that's my nail.
Yeah, and I echo everything that Jenny has said. I think sentencing reform is the next frontier that we have to take on. We have to take on people being sentenced to 30, 40, 50 years in prison. And really ask ourselves, is that working? Why do we do this? Are we safer? Is that actually what, if there is a victim of a crime, is that what they actually want? And evaluating how has time influenced where the victim may be. Because if you are a victim, in 2010, and you may feel one kind of way in 2010, you may feel completely different in 2020. And how do we reevaluate that? How do we evaluate how people change over time? And asking ourselves, and really asking, are people still the same risk as they were when they entered prison? I think that, where I have sort of landed in my current fight is the second half of what Jenny is talking about. And I think we really have to continue to look, or start to look, at what we call mass supervision. And this, what I mean by that is the probation and parole population. There are millions of people in prison. There are even more that are on some type of community supervision. So as we are looking to decarcerate our jails and prisons, as we are looking to get people out of jails and prisons, it's not that people are being released and they're free, that they're just off living their lives. No, people are either being supervised by a probation officer or they're being supervised by a parole officer. And I think this is important because there are often costs that come associated with being on probation and parole. Some people are paying $40 a month to be supervised. And the reality is people that come through the criminal legal system, these are not wealthy people. The vast majority of people that are coming through the system are poor people. So we have entire cities and communities across the country where they are propping up their communities on the backs of poor people by the costs that are associated with our systems. People paying to be electronically monitored. That's an issue that we had the privilege to work with Rep. Ammons on over the last year and a half, that people come out of prison who have served their full prison sentence and then are immediately put on house arrest. When you come out of prison and you're immediately put on house arrest, how do you reacclimate with your family? How do you start to look for a job? How do you start to live again? We are talking about some people who have served 20 and 30 years in prison. I mean, imagine you have been locked away for 20 years. What does the world look like to you? How do you begin to adjust? And the question that we have never been able to get an answer on is, well, how does this help that person, right? Everything that we should be doing should be aimed at helping the individual, should be aimed at helping somebody, not just being punitive and restrictive just for the sake of being punitive and restrictive. And again, all of this comes at a cost. How are we paying for these things? What could we be using this money for? But it's also the cost to people, the cost to families. Going back to Ann's story, her life, right? Like, what is the cost to her family? What is the cost to her son? What does it mean for her son to have lost his mother for 16 months, or to go back and have to go see his mother go back and forth to court? What is the trauma that he will have to now overcome, and how might that impact his life? So these are the things that we have to keep thinking about. I will say that sentencing reform and looking at our probation and parole are two things that we must do, because the reality is also that parole and probation, they are drivers of our prison population. We see that here in Illinois, that 30% of people that enter the Department of Corrections are on mandatory supervised release. They have just exited prison within 3 years. That is a driver of our prison population, and we have to start to unpack why that is happening and unpack what are we doing wrong. I have so much more to say. I think even prisons, I'm gonna pause for there.
Well, Patrice, I appreciate you because I spoke on I'm the chair of higher ed, and so I'm also working with the Senate Majority Leader, Leader Lightford, on our education panel from the Black Caucus. And one of the things that we highlighted in our rollout of our first pillar on the education piece was that we spend at least $34,000 per year per inmate or more, right? I'm averaging here because I know it's more, depends on where you are, but we maybe average $13,000 per pupil for school. To me, it tells me that the priorities may not be to educate your society to prevent some of the public safety issues that come as a result of poverty, that comes as a result of lack of resources that are baked into the system. But we would rather invest our dollars in keeping them there longer, because that itself is a business, and all of the business corps that are tied to prisons and prison profiteering. We'd rather do that because it makes us think by way of stigmatizing other people that they're safer, right? Remember that this is a plantation kind of policy making mentality. And when you deal with plantation policy making, what you do is you say, I got to otherize someone because society said that group of people are not worthy of investment. And you see that throughout the Black community. There's no stores, there's no investment in those areas. Now, we will take everybody's dollars, so you can spend all your money with us, but we will not invest any with you. which creates poverty, which creates crime, they know this already. I'm not a sociologist, but they do know this already. So policymakers have to take responsibility for not creating policy that bring true public safety to our communities. Everybody wants to be safe in their community, but if you don't invest, and you only invest into Main Street, one block going down with bars and restaurants, but you don't invest in the heart of those communities where the resources are most needed, then you are going to create a certain kind of pathology that is created by the lack of investment. And so that's one thing I think Patrice really hit on well. The other thing is that we have geriatric prisoners in the state of Illinois that in many cases, because of the law, again, that keeps them in, most of them would have been out already had we not passed the Ronald Reagan kind of policies during the Reagan era. See, this is baked in systemic racism. If you don't unpack that and deal strictly with how did you create a prison system that has people serving longer sentences than anywhere in the entire world, if you don't unpack that, you would think that this is a just system, right? They did something wrong. They should be held accountable for it. And our courts say you have to stay this amount of time. But there is a point where a person does not become useful in the prison system any longer, and they can't do much because they're geriatric patients and it costs the state more to keep them incarcerated than it does to get them community-based support systems so that they can get out and in many cases live the rest of the few years that they may have left. Because our system is so structured to perpetual, right? Remember, Black people were supposed to be enslaved forever, right? We were supposed to be enslaved forever. And so we created systems constitutionally that backs this kind of forever perpetual punishment. And so we have to get out of that. It takes honesty. It takes reflection. People can't be sensitive about the issues. Don't start talking about, because I raised this issue about enslavement, that all of a sudden it wasn't my fault. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the policies that generated and created these kind of forever systems where people can't get out. So I've been working with Parole Illinois so that we can address the geriatric issue around parole, which is SB 3233. We need help to move these things. I understand that people run and say, we're going to use the victim argument that they should never get out, but that is, each case has merit on its own. And if we don't create a system to allow there to be a review, we don't even have a system for review of geriatric inmates. If we don't create a system for review, how can we take up the issue individually to see if that person is situated in a way and safely can be released? If we don't do that, I don't think we're doing due diligence, and we're not being fair, honestly, to the taxpayers of Illinois. We would rather spend all of our money on incarceration than we would on education, and it's bearing itself out.
Yeah, those numbers are really shocking. The difference, 34,000 to keep someone incarcerated and 14,000. I mean, that's shocking.
It's even more now. Because the costs keep rising and they always delay on how long they tell. It's now about 38,000. And for elderly folks, it's 2 to 5 times as much. Each elderly person is 2 to 5 times more expensive to incarcerate. And when you've got 20% of our prison population is elderly, the numbers are extraordinary. We represent about 100 people serving life sentences for armed robberies where no one was hurt, and drug cases. I have a client right now who is serving a life sentence, dying in prison because he had 4 grams of crack cocaine in his own apartment. And he is elderly, and the state's attorney will almost certainly oppose his release. And his incarceration, which is ridiculous and pointless and serving no one, will cost this state millions of dollars over the course of his life.
I think the other piece of this is once people are released, how are they set up to succeed? Yeah. What does success look like? And how do we, again, how are we again looking for ways to provide for people? I mean, I don't know if Ann, you want to talk about what it was for you when you you exited prison, but people come out with maybe $25 and are expected to live. People who have been in prison, whether it's a year or whether it's 20 years. I think, again, it's talking about what a waste that we are not even preparing people who have been sitting in the same place for years, and they are not prepared to come out. We see all the reentry services across the country, and that is amazing work. That is necessary work. The question is, why is it necessary, though? What are we doing for people? What are we providing for people who are incarcerated that when they come out, why aren't people prepared? My mind is sort of always blown when I listen to stories of people who have been incarcerated, and they say, oh, I came out and I had to go to this program. I had to do this. I had to go do this. And I said, well, what did they provide for you when you were incarcerated for 5 years? What trainings were you able to do or able to receive? And I think that is, it's a cycle that we release people into poverty and then expect them to perform Herculean efforts to live and survive. And the reality is many do, right? Many do, but why aren't we, if we're going to incarcerate people, why aren't we setting people up to immediately succeed and to be able to live and thrive on day one from release?
First off, why we're going to prison, and for the majority of the women that are in prison, we're dealing with stuff. We got something going on, maybe even from childhood, that we're dealing with to put us in the path that we went in and the situation that landed us in prison. We've got COs that are men that psychologically being in there is hell, seriously. I mean, dealing with everything that you deal with inside, but then you got to think, now you're on your way out. What are you gonna do when you get out? When you don't have nothing. For the most part, when I came out, I don't have family here. I'm out here all by myself. I don't have family here. 60 days upon me getting released, I asked the DCFS worker, hey, I mean, I had a job when I came in. I had an apartment when I came in. When I come out, I'm not gonna have nothing. I want to get my son back right away. What can I do? She said, well, you'll be out soon enough. You can deal with that when you get out. I'm like, what do you mean when I get out? It's going to be too late when I get out. Where am I going to live? I don't even have a parole place. So, I mean, it's just like, when you come out, it's just like, I'm grateful. I'm grateful by the community support that I received when I got out. I didn't get no support from DCFS. I didn't get no support from parole. I didn't get no support from the state of Illinois. I haven't got no support. What have they done? They haven't done nothing to help me. Everything I've done because I work really hard, like every other human and citizen, like I could have done for the 11 months that I wasted in prison. 2.5 years that I fought for my daughter, only to go to prison for 14 days and she get killed. These are systems that I begged for help. How have they helped me? My daughter was murdered in the process of their help. My son psychologically damaged for life behind their help. And here I am every day battling my battles behind the loss, really, of all my children, because mentally nobody's the same. But so where is the help? We gotta reform more than the prison system. We gotta do we gotta make our kids important too. Education is nothing if you can't deal with the stuff that's going on at home. We can't put education before the child welfare reform. We can't. I mean, because the things that are going on at home within the foster system and how they're able to just snatch people away, it's ridiculous.
So, Ann, you've made so many really powerful, important points with your own story and in the larger context. So I'll open this up to you and everyone. So there's a lot of folks on the webinar now. Some have been involved in the issue previously. Some are new to it, maybe. Like, what is it that everyone can do? People that are watching today, like, how can people get activated and engage to help?
I mean, first off, stop falsely calling DCFS on people. Stop doing that, because they're just like calling the police. In fact, they're worse than the police. And a lot of people know that, and they use them. DCFS has so much power. Whenever they do take a phone call and actually make it to somebody's house to actually investigate, they're coming in and they're taking people's children falsely. It's shown that the kids that really need saving, they're not saving. My daughter's one of them. The kids that are from loving homes, they're coming in, they're taking them apart, all because some stupid person called because they're mad. That's too much power for one person. Stop doing that. That's not okay. What people can do is let's hold DCFS accountable. Seriously. You know, in your county, in your community, that you've seen or come across a worker, they have bosses. Their bosses have bosses and their bosses have bosses. You need to use them people. That's what they get paid for, because maybe they don't know what the social worker's doing. We need some checks and balances. We need to, I mean, something brought me to the point of not wanting to do their programs. I've been a positive member of the community the whole time I was here. Something happened. Why don't you help me out and find out what that thing was that happened? Maybe go and check on my daughter like I'm asking you to do, and she would be alive, and maybe mentally I would have been together too. It was a domino effect from 2016. Nobody helped me. I went down. I begged, I pleaded. Help the people that are asking for help. I've not been committing crimes out here. I've been making it to court. I've been doing everything. Something is going on with me. I'm out here asking for help. Try to help me. I'm literally going into agencies asking for help. I didn't get it. I mean, what are you guys getting paid for? You know what I'm saying? Put these people need to be held accountable that are sitting in these positions. Our lawmakers really need to be listening to us. I mean, listen to us. I don't know what you guys are up there doing, but listen to us, because down here, it's bad. These people are able to come in and take our kids. The police are able to just stop us for whatever reason, shoot us down, and it's okay. I mean, I'm scared to go outside. I'm scared to do stuff. I got 4 sons, 3 adult sons. I'm afraid for their lives. You know, I mean, stop putting us in jail. We don't, I mean, what is it doing? It's hurting us. We come out, we can't get a job, we can't get an apartment, we don't have money to pay for anything. We got kids we're trying to get back, we got programs we need to do, but we just sat in your jail all this time doing absolutely nothing, really fighting for our lives. The germs, the fights, the attitudes, the anger. I'm in there for a DUI. Why am I in here with lifers that don't care about life? You know what I'm saying? I mean, the stuff that goes on in there, I mean, the whole system needs to be looked at inside out. That's my point.
So Representative Ammons, I know you have some views here.
I mean, you know, Anntionetta, look, she knows what's going on. Okay, she knows what's going on. And unfortunately, for people who may not have the experience or based on your ethnicity, don't have to worry about DCFS coming in. Let me tell you, I used to work for Child Welfare Agency. I was gonna call the name, but it's not, I shouldn't do that. But I'll tell you, I used to work for Child Welfare Agency, and one of the biggest problems that I had is that we had our white sisters that came out of suburban communities going to social work school because they want to help everybody. And then once they get trained into those systems, they then began to look at how Miss Ann is living, or how Carol is living, or how the person down the street is living, and they criminalize that process. So I'll give you a quick example, and this is a true story, and I have lots of them. A mother with 2 little children is at the park one morning in Urbana. She's early morning playing with her children at the park. She's sitting on a bench. There's a 2-year-old and a 4.5-year-old that are playing with some other children at the park. When they get ready to leave, the children of the other family, they all walk off, and the 4-year-old walks off with them because they're playing, and mom is just using her phone at the park like all mothers do while we're all sitting at the park. And the child now is walking down the street with this other group, but gets separated from mom. Somebody who sees the little child and calls the police, naturally we should do that, right? They call the police come, and they get the child from the other mother who sees the child walking, and they realize what has happened. They call DCFS immediately. The police calls DCFS. DCFS gets involved. They contact the mom who has the other child. They come and take this Black young mother. They take both of these children from her because of something that would have happened to any suburbanite mama on this call. Then we got involved, obviously, because I knew that this is not a reason why we should have children removed from their mother because this child is walking down the street, got separated from the parent. Those are stories I got many of those stories. From
Happened to me.
A child getting locked in a car from grandfather who didn't realize the child locked the windows while they was in a car and had to call someone to unlock. Is that a reason to take people's children? Some of DCFS is a story we can have all along on the panel. I think it needs to be completely reformed. It needs to be dismantled and reformed. It is a vestige of, again, a deliberate separation of children from Black families. We've seen it, the data shows it. We know that some children need the protection of agency, but those who we've seen, the threshold of removal of children from Black families is too low. And we've seen this over and over again. Something so simple like separation at a park. If she was a bad mom, would she be at the park playing? I mean, the reality is most people that are harming their children are not at the park. That's the problem that we see, is that you criminalize the ethnic behavior of Black people and you don't do that to other ethnicities. And so that's why when you go to court in Champaign or you go in Cook County, you see Black families everywhere. And people cannot take this pathology that suggests that there's something wrong with Black people and not something wrong with the system. And that's what I see often is, oh, well, they must be more criminal. No, that's a bygone era that we are all paying for, and we need to stop it, and we need to reform these systems that are literally attacking Black families. And I'll just say this in closing, that there was an incident in Joliet where I'm from. And in this case, as Ms. Ann said, the children who really need protection, you're not protecting. This baby, who's distantly related to us, was killed and hidden in a couch in Joliet, and didn't find that baby for months. And DCFS consistently reported as if that baby had been seen and that baby was dead. And they knew it. And I'm saying unequivocally that this system needs absolutely fundamentally raising, and they need to reform it and create child welfare that is really based on child welfare as opposed to impacting Black families and the destruction of Black families that we've seen over and over and over again. And there's no justification for it.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to add that the proof and you know, the unjustness of how they report or not report is that the woman that killed my daughter had 2 indications of child abuse. However, she was white. So they never seen that. They didn't investigate. So while my daughter, who's got black eyes, broken teeth, who she shaved her head going into the 2nd grade, who told the school that she was afraid to go home, it all fell on deaf ears, you know? So because I'm Black and I'm telling you that this lady is abusing my daughter, by the grace of God, she recorded everything. So it was proven everything that she did it. She murdered my daughter. But because of that fact, they didn't even look at her history. No. They didn't even pull that out until after my daughter was already dead. But they're investigating. That's the bias that needs to be checked within that system.
Right. So we just have a couple minutes left. Jennifer or Patrice, I don't know if there's anything you want to say back to that question about what everybody watching today, what is it that they can do to move forward on some of these issues? Or as some folks say here, you know, when are people going to listen to Ms. Rountree and her story and do something about it?
Yeah, I mean, we always get this question, and there's many things. I think the one thing that I pulled from this last little bit of the conversation is I think there's been a lot of conversation recently around, should you call the police? When should you call the police? Because we know, right, calling the police could be a death sentence for some of us, right? So we have to be thoughtful. All of us have to be thoughtful about who are we calling. And I think DCFS has largely been ignored. Child protection services across the country, people think, well, this is a better alternative. And the story that Representative Ammons just shared is proof that this is not the answer either. that you think that you, by calling the police, or you think by calling Child Protection Services that you are doing the right thing, and everything will just be sorted out. It is never that easy. It is never that simple that things get sorted out right away. In most child protection cases, people are fighting for their children, fighting to get off of registries for years. For years. Child protection cases can take 2-3 years to sort themselves out. And here someone's like, I'm just gonna, make a call and everything will be sorted out. And if it's all okay, it'll all be okay. It's never that simple. So I think we have to be really cognizant about when we are calling the police, when we are calling Child Protection Services, and really look for alternatives and have conversations with each other. What is it that you need? How many times has Ann told us this today? Asking people, what is it that you need? And making sure that we know each other, that we don't bring our our middle class, our upper middle class mindsets to everyone and think that this is how the world is, because, my kids do X, Y, and Z, or my kids have X, Y, and Z. This is what I think parenting looks like. This is what I think life looks like. And if you are doing something different, then there must be something wrong. I think that we have to see the humanity in people, and realize that we are all humans. We are all people, no matter what we have done. We have to support legislators like Representative Ammons. When Representative Ammons is going back to bat for these policy changes, voters have to stand behind her and walk alongside her when she is being bold and taking the bold and transformative change, making those policy changes that we desperately need. Right? She needs support. Her peer legislators need to support her. And then I also think the reality is also, this work is not easy. This work is very hard. Jenny will tell you, we are both former public defenders, this work is soul crushing, but it is so necessary because of how many people are sitting in prisons. The organizations that are doing this work and doing it well at high levels, they need support. Yeah. So I think that there's I hope people can glean from that and figure out what is their lane, and always have conversation with each other. We have to have these hard conversations.
Well, thank you all. I think we're running out of time, but thank you so much for this amazing conversation. And thank you all for all of your tireless work in this area. Each one of you, I know how important this is and how much time and courage really that you show in pushing these issues forward. So Kenya, I'll turn it back over to you to close.
Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. This was a wonderful conversation, and I appreciate the perspective of all of our panelists. What I have heard and taken away from this is that that there's a narrative shift, right? So things that we can do all on this call is to change the narrative, right? People always think it's, someone is at fault, but it's a system that's set up against certain groups of people. And so there's a narrative change that needs to happen. Also, you need to support the laws and policies that we advocate for, right? And also helping our direct service providers as well who interact with justice-involved individuals. So there's many ways that we can help through supporting policies, donating to other organizations similar to the Shriver Center and the nonprofits on this call. I think it's very important that we understand that we can do something, right? We can do something. So with that being said, I also want to invite you to our upcoming webinar on September 30th at 11 a.m., Movement for Child Welfare Justice. There will be a 3-part series over the next few months, and this is one of 3. I also will encourage you, we will send after this webinar to sign our petition in support of economic and racial justice. And I will also encourage everyone to come back and join us October 7th through 9th. The Shriver Center will have our first virtual gala called A Call for Racial Justice each night at 6 p.m. And once again, thank you all for coming out to support this webinar. Thank you all, and for sharing your story. with us today, and we support you and your family, and we hope that you're able to continue to navigate the system and also to create change by lifting up your voice and lifting up your story. So thank you all for joining us. Until next time.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.